you guys for joining us. I'm Sienna, the founding president of Oops, Minnesota. We founded this organization to support the singing community, and we identified a need for professional development and master classes as well because singers, though not trained, are small businesses. So we're trying to fill those gaps in our education, and I'm so excited to have Danielle St.Germain-Gordon here with us today to discuss how she networks, and how she fundraises. She was recently appointed the Interim Executive Director of the San Francisco Ballet, which is, and I just learned this today, America's oldest professional ballet company. Incredibly impressive. And after over 500 days of not performing, they performed this weekend. And back to Danielle, with over 25 years of experience in management, fundraising, and marketing, she has raised more than $400 million. So I anticipate we'll have some questions for her about how she goes about receiving those funds. So without further ado, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Sienna. So this is about networking, and this is a little network story. So whenever I meet people in the world, since I've moved city to city in my career, and I'll give you kind of a haiku version, but I am from Boston. And I am from the same hometown as Sienna, and we went to the same girls' school in Dedham, Massachusetts, Ursuline Academy. We wore, what is it, Campbell plaid? What's the dark green plaid? Not Campbell.
Plaid. I don't know what the official title is of it, but I've got the skirt in my closet.
Oh, I wish I still had my skirt. I would wear it for Halloween every year. And so I give Sienna credit for networking, and that's how she reached out to me and we connected, which is always super fun. So again, my name's Danielle. I'm currently with San Francisco Ballet. I moved here about 3 years ago from Minneapolis. And I think my story is kind of interesting in that I don't think I could have my story happen nowadays as it did back in the olden days. So here's the version. Back in summer of 2000, no, further back, 1999, I was in a marriage I didn't want to be in. And I remember thinking, oh God, I have to get a job. So I went to the want ads in the Washington Post. This is why my story could not happen these days, because there are no longer want ads. Maybe there are. I don't think you get jobs on want ads anymore in the Washington Post. So I somehow finagled myself into a job working for the Gore 2000 campaign. And the fact is, almost nobody then trained to be a fundraiser. And to be a fundraiser is simply you're comfortable asking for things, and you're comfortable getting a yes, of course, and you're comfortable getting a no because you know it's not personal. Nobody's declining me, they're just declining giving me money. So I somehow miraculously got this job, and my job was to teach people how to fundraise, which is kind of, again, a miracle in that I had no training myself. But lo and behold, it turns out, since I'm the last of 4 children, I guess I'm comfortable asking for things and making myself known. So this all happens, and as I'm living in DC, I choose to subscribe to the Shakespeare Theatre. And I've always loved Shakespeare because of my wonderful girls' school training, all sorts of English and all sorts of Latin and wonderful things there. And one fateful night, I received a phone call from a telemarketer housed within Shakespeare Theatre, where they were eating on the phone. They said my name wrong. It was one of those awful telemarketing calls. So I turned to my then husband and said, I'm going to knock on their door tomorrow around the corner at their administrative offices, right around the corner from our house on Capitol Hill. And I'm going to tell them that I can fix their problem. So he's like, you do you. So there I go, knock on the door, get to the receptionist. And I say, there's a liability somewhere in this building, and I think you should hire me to fix it. So somehow the marketing director agrees to see me at that moment. I go up and I explain what I can do for them, and somehow I'm hired. So that's the first way. You say what you want. You actually, I really believed I could do the job, and it was really convenient. It was around the corner. It was perfect. So kind of within weeks, I said, here's a 4-week plan. I'm going to rework all the scripts. I'm going to fire the whole crew of telemarketers. I'm going to hire and train new people. And it turned out to be super, super successful. So as I'm there doing this work, I would see kind of over the partition, the development ladies, and they would come in later. They'd always leave a little earlier, very dressed up, always going to some fabulous places. And I was like, that's kind of what I think I should do. I think I could do that. And so at that moment, I decided to make myself sticky and critical. So every phone call, any issue, any subscriber issue, I would teach the callers to say, if ever you have an issue, just ask for Danielle. So pretty soon, box office, people would show up. Where's Danielle? I need this. Where's Danielle? She said she'd help. Where's Danielle? So pretty soon, everyone's like, who is this Danielle person? And here I was. And at that same moment, I would always volunteer to go do a seat visit in the theater, anything, a tour, a visit, a pre-show drink, anything to be upfront, outward facing. So fast forward 8 years later, we did an $89 million capital campaign successfully. And after that point in one's career, when you have a verifiable kind of success with a track record, you actually don't really apply for jobs. They come looking for you, which is a very, very good feeling. So from there, I went on to the American Association of Museums, which is the nonprofit. It's like a service organization, maybe for, it's like League of American Orchestras, or it's like Dance USA, but it's for museums. So I was there for 3 years and I loved it. However, as we all know in the performing arts, it's place-based and social. And when you're with kind of a museum association, it was more almost governmental. It was kind of like a 10 to 5. We didn't have a theater. We didn't have a home base. So I was kind of not feeling it. And just as I wasn't feeling it, Arena Stage calls. So I jump over and I go back to theater. So this is where the story becomes kind of more about networking. So I'm at Arena Stage, love it, totally digging it. And then the Guthrie Theater calls me. And in the world of theater, the Guthrie is a crown jewel, especially, so this is back in 2013, so a minute ago. And so I fly out and I agree to take the job, at which point I have this frightening moment where I'm like, uh-oh, I am moving from a city where I've had my entire career, all of my friends. How am I going to navigate? Like, where do I start? And in a fundraising career, you have kind of two choices. So there are some fundraising professionals who choose to network with peers. So they'll go to conferences and they're very into kind of the educational aspect of their job, which I think is probably cool. I have always opted to network with checkbooks. So I choose to network with donors, events, social gatherings, because A, it's fun, it's kind of my personality, and B, you make money and you become more successful in your job. So that was like the fork in the road where I decided I wanted to network with the checkbook versus the classes and conferences, which can be fun, technically, maybe, although I really never actually did them. So at that moment, though, I learned my goal anytime I walk into a room is to, within a handful of questions, find something in common with somebody. So this is a pretty good example. So when I was in Minneapolis, I was on the board of Achieve Minneapolis, and I went to speak to sophomores at, I think it was Southwest. I think it was Southwest High School before my daughter went there. So at Southwest, and or maybe one of the schools, Washburn. Anyway, I'm out of the school, and explaining how one can network. And so I said to the room full of sophomores, that whole group of children or young people had no interest in what I was talking about. They absolutely didn't care about a career in the theater. So I said, let's play a game. Within 3 questions, we're going to have something in common. So I said, I am not from Minneapolis. I am from back east. And so a couple of them kind of sit up, and I said, I am from not Boston, but also there's an island off of Cape Cod. It's called Martha's Vineyard. And the kid in the back kind of raises his hand. And he says, well, I go there. I said, oh, how interesting. So when you go there, there's a ferry. Which town do you take the ferry to? I take it to Vineyard Haven. Oh, that's where I go. So when you get off the ferry, which direction do you go? Oh, I take a right and I go up and it's on Hatch Road. I know Hatch Road. Fast forward, his mother was my childhood friend who I had not seen since I was 10, and I am now 52, 51. So that's the beauty. That's what networking is, where you find something. So when you move to a new city, you can find anything in common. People like what they are. So for me, I'm 6'1" barefoot. So if I'm in an elevator, which you can't be in elevators with strangers anymore, but if I'm in an elevator And you want to make small talk because here in San Francisco, we have super tall buildings. Small talk can be, wow, are you 6'1" like I am? All of a sudden, yes, I'm 6'1". Do you get your shoes at Nordstrom's? Yes, I get my shoes at Nordstrom's. All of a sudden you have a rapport. Or it can be based on an accent somebody has. I hear somebody and I'll say, are you from Boston? Yes, I'm from Boston. And you have a connection. It can be where you went to school. It can be what your hobbies are, but your goal should be to find something in common because that makes you more memorable and makes them more interested in spending time with you. So that's my like number one key of networking. And it's very important when you move to a different city. So Minneapolis, I had to navigate people, places, what cars people drive, because where I came from, I could see a car pull up, I'd know who they were. I'd know what house they lived in. That was not true in Minneapolis. And so in one's career, you get to a place where you finally feel like you know where like the bodies are hidden, you know where people live, you know their names, you know their grandkids. And then you are asked to take a job in a different city. And you're like, oh God. So fast forward, San Francisco, here I come. So I land here and I dust off my old networking skills, which made my landing a whole lot softer because people, especially in Minneapolis, I found people are many times people who live in Minneapolis were raised there, right? So some people, if you are raised in one city your whole life, you're full up on friends. Like if you went to kindergarten with somebody and the cabin was near somebody, and it takes a lot of energy to find a new friend and to make room for them. So it's harder in Minneapolis than in some other places. So in San Francisco, a bit more transient, kind of easier, but all the same rules certainly apply. So my advice to people is when you're networking for yourself, is that you want to make yourself memorable in some way, find some way to connect, and always go in to close the deal. Like if you're going to engage with somebody at a party and you're talking and talking, you spend half an hour, you absolutely want to get their cell phone, get their business card, get their email. Some sort of follow-up is super important. Otherwise, I mean, if you go into a cocktail party that's 2 hours long, you might talk to 3 people by the time you're done. And if you leave without kind of a game plan, it's kind of wasted. It's kind of wasted and you don't want to waste your time. And so in my career here at the ballet I'm still currently chief development officer somehow, and I'm actually chief marketing officer for a minute. And then now this new role, which is fun. I always start with what I call my hit list. If I go to a party, I know exactly who my get will be. And I plan and I focus and I watch. And then after I meet with somebody and I run to the ladies' room and I type myself all the notes that I need to remember, because you have your second glass of wine sometimes, and then you're like, what did I promise I was going to send them? And you just have to write your notes and always follow up. The key to success in fundraising is being responsive, you're following through, being resilient when somebody says no, and just all around being capable. Just all around being a capable person. If you think about Teresa with her camera, Teresa works every room, but just gets it done. Like the drink is handled, the picture is taken, people feel welcomed, and that's what people want from a fundraiser. So a fundraiser is basically a cruise director meets a concierge at a really top hotel. And our job is to make everybody feel like they belong in that room. So that's kind of my haiku version of what I do and how so far it's worked. And I hope it continues to work, actually. But I'm happy to, because I talk very quickly as well. And I am happy to field all sorts of questions about your lives and what you want to learn.
That was amazing. I want to drink bottles and bottles of wine with you and talk all about this. I would like to start off by opening it up for any questions from the peanut gallery, because I know I have a lot, but I don't want to railroad this. So I'll just leave a couple seconds of silence, and if no one jumps in, I will.
All right, I'm going to jump in because Danielle, you touched on the fact that Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Twin Cities, are somewhat insular, and that folks here are not necessarily looking for an expanded friend list. So when you walked into a room and everybody was already in their groups, what did you do to get yourself kind of psyched up to go and like interrupt the group and insert yourself in there to have that conversation?
Oh, it's such a good question. And it's a really good softball. I appreciate it. So when I arrived in Minneapolis, actually, I inherited a team at the Guthrie, and they were all super talented in a more, maybe they're a bit more, they appeared to be more introverted. They were not, but I believe they felt that their role was to kind of be in the background. And so I went to my first event at the Guthrie, and it was wonderful, but kind of the staff was like the servers in the room, and then the guests were all in the middle. So at that point, I explained the figure eight, where you walk into a room and you cover the room in a figure eight. And so a big figure eight, right? You don't walk small because that would look really weird. So in your little traveling around a room, you want to see if there's a person who's awkwardly alone, staring at their shoes. Or a great way to break in is if somebody's kind of reviewing like a donor plaque or something on the wall, you just kind of slide up next to them. But engaging in conversation. And the key is to captivate them immediately. Otherwise, you're actually just interrupting them. Although I kind of like interrupting people. I kind of say, oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt, and I go right in for it. But I also have like major attention deficit. So it's fun because I get to like drop in, hi, and then I can go off to the next. It's kind of like a bee pollinating a flower. And that's what a development person should do. The worst thing that can happen is if you get sequestered or cornered by a couple that will never give more money, and they commandeer you all night. The key is learning how to slip away for that. And that's where having children or claiming you have children is beneficial. Oh, I have to go check on my kids, go check my phone, and you can skitter away. But you don't ever want to be locked in to a conversation that's not beneficial to your goals that night. Did that help, Teresa?
I have to say, Ryan Taylor is one of the most expert people I've ever seen at exiting a conversation. Every time I'm like,
yes,
I can remember that line, like, because I don't even know how to end it sometimes. So
it's hard. It's hard because it's also in development. 80% of the time you have these awkward pregnant pauses. And then you don't really just want to like chit chat. Like you don't want to say like, how's the weather? I mean, that's why even just don't. You're better off just standing there looking elegant as opposed to kind of that nonsensical chit chat. So finding something.
I love that. I also love the tip of the figure eight and finding someone who's isolated, because it's so intimidating to join a group of people, even if you know one of the people. So yeah, I'm going to steal that. I just don't have any events to try these with. That's why I'm taking.
Oh, you will soon. You will. The world's coming back. It's coming back.
So,
and also when you go to an event, so this is all based on working an event, but here in San Francisco, kind of pre-COVID, it's a very, very social city. So when I go to an event as a guest, which is the most fun because it's never my problem, right? You don't have to worry about it's the most fun in the world is going to a party that's not mine. But I apply all of the exact same rules. The figure eight, the thing, the notes, the thing, the follow-up. It's kind of fun.
So going back to your 3-question game, are there any go-to questions that you ask?
I typically do geography. Isn't that crazy? But the reason I do that is because like you hit a certain age and I'm from Boston. I went to school in Los Angeles. I lived my 20s in Sun Valley, Idaho. I went through New York, landed in DC, Minneapolis, back to San Francisco. So by the time you hit that many cities, I've got to have like 2 degrees of separation. Like I've got to. So that's my go-to because it's kind of alarming. Just how small the world is. So that's my go-to. I mean, in the world of dance, I kind of do like to do the connector thing, of course, at the ballet. And they'll be like, oh, do you know so-and-so? And let me go get them. And I drag some poor dancer over to engage. And then I have to remain there because otherwise they will be captured and they will not be let free. So I need to make sure that I then say, oh, I have to take them around. Everybody wants to see them. And I run off because otherwise it's a cruel punishment. Yeah. Yeah. So
And
yeah, so I think it's geography. Geography, it's not really school, because I think school can be really obnoxious. Like, yeah, I don't like when people are like, oh, where'd you go to school? Okay, the person's like 70. Do we really care where they went to school? So so geography.
And so tangential to that, what are your go-to icebreakers if you're going to saddle up to a stranger and strike up a conversation?
Well, before I select my targets, I kind of look at kind of them. I kind of scope out. You kind of know what conversation you're heading into, especially, to be clear, here in San Francisco, it's kind of more like New York. It's a little different than Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a bit more understated, a bit more low key, in a really kind of elegant, subtle way. San Francisco, it is, who did your hair? Oh my God, is that a new Oscar? Did you get that at Neiman's? That's San Francisco. And the minute anything like that, fashion, so that's how I pick my targets. So it's basically, and depending on the room, if it's somebody who I've seen recently in like the social mag, I'll be like, oh my God, I saw your picture. Could you look more fabulous? Oh, why, thanks. Guard down. Yeah, so it's, here it's social, and here it's full of compliments, actually. Here it's much more compliments on physical things. And in DC, it was compliments on intellectual things. In DC, it would be like, oh, you work for Senator so-and-so, or, oh, you helped pass the blah, blah, blah bill. San Francisco, it's a lot based on the aesthetics.
And how does
So
Minnesota
then what was it
compare
in
to you?
Minneapolis? Sorry,
Yeah,
Sienna.
Tina, we had the same question.
Minneapolis, the thing that people were most proud of, there's a huge amount of civic pride in Minneapolis. So there, I would do my research and say, like, I think you have been here since we opened when we were at the Walker. Oh, yes, yes, we were there for the first performance of Hamlet. Like, that's the pride. And if somebody, then of course, it's scary because I, at that point, had been there a year. And I didn't know all those, 50 years of history, or 60 years of 50 years. 60. Anyway, long time. So you have to be careful, because on occasion, especially working in theater, when I worked at Shakespeare Theatre, they wrongly assumed I was a Shakespeare scholar. And so then they'd start to be like, how do you feel about? And I'd be like, oh, let me go check on the wine. Go, because it's not my skill. And I've learned to be just very upfront with what my skills are. So when you move, so I spent it was Shakespeare, and then it was Museum World, and then it was more American theater. Then the Guthrie, which is kind of kitchen sink theater, and now ballet. So I'm like, oh God, I need to brush up on ballet movements. And I'm very clear, because I'm so tall. I'm 6'1", and strangely, when I meet strangers at a party, they'll be like, oh, of course you're a dancer. Look at how tall you are. And I'm like, not how it goes. Typically, our dancers are about 5'2", but in their mind, they see dancers on stage, they're on point, and they do look very tall, but they're not. They're not tall like I am.
I would love to see a guy lift you up
Can you
and
imagine?
parade you across the stage.
Can you imagine?
He'd be like 6'8", and
I would be in the fly space. Can you imagine? Yeah.
I think as interim director, you can make this happen.
Oh, I could break somebody's back. So actually, it's very interesting in dance companies. So at San Francisco Ballet, our male dancers are not particularly tall. But I did a donor trip to Copenhagen where we went to visit with the Royal Danish, and their male dancers are they're all like 6 feet tall. So it's just, the whole thing is fascinating. The world of dance is fascinating.
So you mentioned pulling, an unwitting dancer over to talk to a potential patron. In those situations, what do you hope the artist will do or say?
Oh, it's such a good question. So this past winter, so January till March, April, I taught, I guess, a 10-week, 12-week class to any dancers who wanted to take the class, basically a development 101. And so each night, it was a Tuesday night, every Tuesday night from like 9 to 10:30, because they're night owls, by the way, night owls. And each week was something different. First is, what is a nonprofit? What's a 990? Like, how do you find a 990? Everything, corporate fundraising, special events, budgeting, direct mail, return on investment. And the good part was, since I offered them this class in my own personal time, they were then willing to say yes to pretty much anything I asked them to do. So this has been the year of virtual events, and the ballet, we did exceptionally well. We were pretty early with our events, and they were truly magnificent. I mean, we did kind of knock it out of the park work. And the good news is we got the dancers all to volunteer their time, whereas historically they were not necessarily able or willing or interested in volunteering their time. So it created this beautiful sense of community. And I do believe in any relationship that we go into in our work lives and our personal lives, it should be a two-way street. Like, I'm going to help you dancers because one day when you're like 25, you might need a new job, right? Because you think about a dance career, sometimes 30, 35, but it's, I mean, and these dancers, they generally professionally trained from about age 11. They do not go to a high school. They are training and living here in our ballet school, and they're getting their diplomas on their own. They do not typically go to college, although we do raise money for them to go to it towards their bachelor's degree here at St. Mary's. But it's important for them to know that they have other skills. And I believe when you have an artist who is no longer kind of in their career, they have incredible skills. I mean, there must be, of all of our dancers, we have 78, but I would say if 10 of them were to leave their dance career, I would hire them in a heartbeat, because they know better than anybody all about the work, the field, the audiences, and they would be incredible fundraisers if they learn how to fundraise, which means being able to ask people for things and not being horrified if they say no. That's basically what fundraising is. So the dancers, and one thing you have to do, because our dancers can be younger than 18. So we have to be very, very careful when we bring our dancers or our students into a group setting. We have to make sure that there's not alcohol nearby and that people behave, right? I mean, there are nights, we all know there's parties and there's wine and you just have to super be careful. And in a development office, my job has always been as kind of like mother hen to make sure that nobody messes with my people. Like, nobody is going to mess with my people, because if they do, they can answer to this. And there's actually not one gift on the planet financially that is worth people being rude or awful or creepy to artists or staff. And that's something like, that's a zero tolerance zone for me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you go about asking someone for a donation? Like, can you talk us through that conversation and how you try to formulate it?
So there are a number of schools of thought on that. I, very early in my career, got burnt a few times where there's a thing called Wealth Engine. So it's basically a screening service where we can send our database out, and then within a matter of days, you get back all of the publicly available information about pretty much anybody. So publicly available information might be your real estate taxes, your political contributions, if you own a yacht or a boat longer than 30 feet, if you own an airplane, and those are all signs of wealth. So I could spend my day being like, oh, Teresa Murray, and looking and looking and looking, and I could find what I wanted to, but instead I would have her name in my big Wealth Engine file. So we basically, this is years, 2004. So we ship it off to Wealth Engine, get back the file, and we rate it, top to bottom, basically the wealthiest to the least wealthy. And my then boss was like, great, you're going to go take this meeting with these people and you're going to ask them for $1 million. And I was like, I know, it feels good because they don't really show up at the theater. So I basically had this beautiful folder with all the materials. So we get to the restaurant. I put this beautiful folder under my chair. And basically at the top of the lunch, the couple's like, we don't know why you called us. Like, we don't really like Shakespeare. I'm like, okay, why did you accept? And everyone, when you're on the donor side, don't accept if you don't want to give. Like, what, free lunch? Come on, don't accept. If you have no inclination of giving, it's awkward for you, it's awkward for everybody. Just say, thank you, but no thank you. And like, I'm full. So it becomes very clear that these people have absolutely no interest. So towards the end, they're like, oh, what did you bring? I'm like, oh, nothing. They're like, no, under your chair you brought. I was like, oh, that? oh, let's see it. So I basically had to show this because I couldn't, and they were like, oh my God, you were going to ask us for $1 million? Like, who are you, crazy? And I was like, yes, apparently I am. So the way I ask for money is I never, ever, ever bring anything with me. I will start my conversation with, I'm so glad we're meeting. I want you to give $100,000, and I know you will because you're the best person on the human on the planet. And how's it sound? Great. What are you gonna have for lunch? That's how I fundraise. And then we don't talk about it after. I have a very particular style because most people will actually walk them through the opportunities, which is a really kind way of fundraising. But I am at the point with my kind of schedule and what I do here where I handpick who I want to, solicit. And if they're not going to give or upgrade, I won't take the meeting at this point. Because the ballet, we raise in a typical year about 25 million here at the ballet. And then we sell about 25 million of tickets as well. But here they also know, like if the chief development officer is inviting them for lunch, and I never bait and switch. Like some people, when I was in Minneapolis, they would say like, oh, why do you want to have lunch with me? I'd say, because I'm going to ask you for money. Because it's really unfair to be like, oh, I just want to catch up, because that's actually a lie. Like, I don't want to catch up. I'm there. I want to catch up as I ask you for money. And I think it's very important just to be very transparent. And after you get the gift, you can't drop them like a hot potato. After you get the gift, you need to remember to stay kind of in contact. Some people's idea of staying in contact is over the top. Some people expect you to call them weekly. Like, that's not my jam. But it's important to remember who gave you money. If you see them out in public, to acknowledge them, to kind of embarrass them in a really nice way. Like, oh my God, Mary, you're the best. Did you know Mary sponsored that ballet last week? And oh no, and they love it. They lap it up. They love it. And so to give them kind of public praise, that also works really well.
I'm going to pause for a few seconds for someone else to jump in with a question. If not, I have one. Good, I will talk. Now, when you talked about training dancers to be fundraisers, when you say that there were 10 of them that you immediately knew you would hire, what was it about them that you zeroed in on?
It's so strange. So learning a new industry. So in the world of theater, which I know better than pretty much anything, in the world of theater, theoretically, a person theoretically could walk off the street. They could walk into an audition. They could nail it and become super famous. Like, that could happen. And actually kind of has happened if you think about television, film. I mean, those weird things do happen. In the world of opera, certainly, in the world of dance, there's no way on earth ever, I'll speak to dance, there's absolutely no way you could get to where you want to go without 10 hours a day of training for the past X number of years. There's just no way. And in the world of ballet, something that I remind staff at the ballet all the time is that, the perfect is the enemy of the good, because everything we do on the artistic side is flawless. And so there's a culture of, if it's not perfect, like, we're not going to stop till it is perfect. So how that translates into the admin side is, there'll be a brochure that goes through 80 iterations. Like, there'll just be this like iterative, and we'll just keep on going until it becomes perfect. And at some point you're like, wait, good enough's good enough. No grammatical errors, like, it's good. Send it to print and use it. So it's been hard, but in the world of dance, generally they are more quiet people, and their job has been to listen and focus and kind of take, well, I won't say orders, but to follow directions very, very, very carefully. And they're also in a hierarchical thing where you are a trainee, you're an apprentice, you are a core member, you're a soloist, you're a principal. Like, there are rules for each level. And so the ones who I kind of picked out of the lineup, they somehow got comfortable enough to find me. Like, I remember, like, it was 2.5 years ago, they kind of tracked me down in my office. I'd be like, oh God, what are you doing here? Like you left the studio. It's like, why are you here? It's so strange. And on occasion, they've now learned to really just speak up. And I think they're seeing that this job development, A, they think they might be good at it, and B, it could be fun. And C, those of us in nonprofit organizations, the closer you are to revenue, generally, the bigger your salary will be, generally. So that translates into, if you are, let's imagine you're the top job in development versus the top job in HR, generally, you're going to make more money in development. Ditto for finance and other things, generally. So the closer you are to money, and also if you're a dancer, you can, your skill is your history and the people you worked with, the people you danced with, the choreographers you know. So I think for them just to raise their hand and say like, I want to learn more, that was a very, very, very big aha. Yeah.
And then going back a couple steps, how do you maintain your relationships? You mentioned after they donate, stay in contact with them. Do you set reminders when to reach out? How do you keep track of engaging in those relationships?
Oh, it's so hard. So here's the worst part of me is I collect donors as friends. So the good news is, like, you meet somebody, you have a shared interest, they give money, they're cool. Like all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, you're kind of an amazing person. So they become your friend. The problem is down the road, I then generally want to pass off the work relationship to someone else, generally. But also there are people who collect development people. Like there are some folks in the Minneapolis community in every city who basically they're best friends. I know here in San Francisco, their best friend might be me, the opera, the symphony, AC, and it's kind of an interesting choice of best friends. But so it's hard. It's hard. And what was very hard for me in Minneapolis was, I mean, this is kind of untrue, but I'll say it kind of. In DC, it's such a vibrant, diverse community where very few people were really kind of from there. It was pretty transient, people in and out, European, all this. So I got to Minneapolis and everybody was like a Peterson with an E, a Peterson with an O, Anderson with an E with it. And I was like, oh my God, they're like all the same. They're like all the same people. So that was very, very hard for me. That was the hardest part of getting kind of in the flow in Minneapolis. So I've mastered how to be like, and how are you? Oh my God, I love seeing you. And then I'd be like, oh, say hello. And I'd hope they'd say their name. And there's this awful habit in the world that I encourage you all to never adopt, which is when somebody says, oh my gosh, how are you? I'm Danielle. And you're meant to say, hi, I'm Sienna. You're not meant to say, hi, Danielle. Like, no, the game doesn't go that way. I give you my name and you give me your name, because that's the thing that makes my palms sweat. If I'm like, oh my God. And I can remember grandkids, locations, pets, surgeries, but there are just some faces that look alike, and it's horrifying. So that's my scary moment.
For me, I'm really good at faces, but names sometimes fly by me and I can't remember them. And then I get anxious that I'm going to forget a name.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I've already told my husband, I'm like, if I introduce you, this is my husband, Luke. That is your cue to say, oh, what's your name? So that tells you I forgot it.
It's so good. So I've also learned to say, oh, I'm so glad to see you. I don't say nice to meet you, because some people are like, I've met you 5 times. And the problem is, in the world of development, much like in the world of performing, probably everybody knows you. Probably. So if ever you're on stage in front of hundreds of people, they know who you are. You don't know who they are. And that's a scary moment. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if this is a question for you, if you've had this experience, but what is your opinion on and strategies for cold emailing to establish a relationship, rapport?
It can work. It depends on the format of the email. Like, I'm a stream of consciousness sort of person. So I don't think I'd go like cold, like if somebody's in the ballet's database and I run the development operation, I'm happy. I'll email anybody, of course. But if I just randomly, let's imagine I heard of somebody and I got their email, that would make me nervous. I'd want to like hunt them down first, casually encounter them in their local grocery store or something. And then I'd want to plan a meeting somehow.
So your recommendation is to find someone who knows that person to go through. So avoid cold emailing, cold contacts at all costs.
I mean, I'll call people cold, but I think, yeah, totally stalking. Yep, 100% stalking. Isn't that funny? 100%. It's kind of alarming, actually, how you can do that in this life, and it's funny.
Especially with social media.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, it depends. Like, there are some philanthropists in the world, we all, like, poor Judy Dayton, rest in peace. But there are people who will probably be like, ooh, if only I could like get an email to Judy Dayton. The fact is, it's never going to work. Like, it's never going to work. That said, when I was at the Guthrie, we were doing Music Man, and I had tried this routine years prior at Arena Stage when we were doing the Music Man, and we created a fabulous video of the Wells Fargo wagon, that song, and all this staff lips, and then we ran. And so we tried to get Wells Fargo to support Arena. They had no money, they claimed. Fast forward, get to Minneapolis, we're doing Music Man, and we did the video, and I cold emailed, at that point it was John Stumpf, right? He was the CEO. John Stumpf? Yeah. And so it was the most brilliant thing, actually. Truly, the video was amazing. It was everything. And he responded. So we then had all these conversations. So that did work, but he was also kind of like a almost public persona, right? He was like the CEO of a major bank. So on occasion, if you have something really like super creative, it can work, but it wouldn't be my top strategy.
So if I were to say, I want so-and-so to be a donor for San Francisco Ballet, your strategy then would be?
Oh, find somebody. So I send once a month to my board. I have a very connected board. I send a screening list. And the screening list used to be, when we were performing, comprised of all new ticket buyers, subscribers who recently were wealth screened. So I basically pluck the top 50 and give first name, last name, town. And I would say, if you know somebody on this list, and by knowing, I don't simply mean you've seen their face in a magazine or that you know their name, but if you know them well enough to invite them to an event as, you know, our guest or your guest. So we've had some good hits that way. We've had some very good hits that way. So a screening list, they definitely work. The board feels engaged. The board then knows that you're actually working. Sometimes they don't know what you do, right? So this way you can be like, there's that list. And then at the end of a year, you report back saying, this year you reviewed 600 names. We had 10 new gifts at $15,000, you know, that sort of thing. And the reporting back, the accountability piece is what really works when you're trying to grow confidence across the board.
That's awesome. I've never heard of a screening list and never thought of like compiling names and then running them by your point people to say, how can you anyone know these people to connect? I'm going to pause just for a second to open it up for other questions. But again, I could keep going. So just give it a couple. Okay, so your transition to development, because that was the big step. You became the point person of, I need Danielle. Where's Danielle? Mm-hmm. Now, once you pivoted to development, what did you have to learn to succeed in that new field?
Well, before I moved to development, so I somehow again fall into this is 2000, like computers were kind of a thing, but I spent my 20s skiing in Idaho, so don't ask. I never had a computer. Like, I didn't know these things. And then the internet was a thing, but it was new. It was a big new thing back in the late 90s. So I remember before I jumped to development, somebody said, oh, you have to do a mail merge. And I'm like, oh, okay. I was like, cool. Where's the mailman? And they're like, what? I was like, isn't there like a mailman? They're like, a mail merge? I'm like, yeah. Like, what is it? I had absolutely zero skills. I had no idea. I thought it was actually somehow a person or something. So I learned very quickly. So in development, for me, it was really my kind of lived experience of traveling and just having kind of this fantastic, my 20s were great. And just really being social. It was just being out and about in town. And somehow, like it just worked. And it doesn't always work, but it just kind of worked. And I guess if you fall into the right community at the right time, and it's always been very not very easier, I think, for me, because I'm really, really tall. So if I walk into the room, I can see every human. And the problem is every human can see me. And I learned, actually, Joe Hodge told me in one of my reviews, he's like, I need you to know that your eyes say a lot. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I mean, I used to like roll my eye, and he's like, everybody watches you. Like everybody has their eyes on you. So you need to understand that. I was like, I need to thank you for telling me that, because it's true. I would do these horrible, faces. And I have learned not to do that.
Were there any skills besides email that you had to hone, or
I love writing. Oh, I love writing. I love writing. I write all my letters. I don't have anybody writing for me. I love communicating that way. My thoughts are more entertaining that way. And it's the skill. And in the world of development, you can raise money through email. You can raise money face-to-face. You can raise money over the phone, or you can raise money through the mail, the postal service. And generally, I mean, a true face-to-face is where you're going to get the most money, generally. Right behind that is a piece of mail, a well-written letter with a postage paid envelope. And it's the right message to the right person at the right time for the right amount. And then you have telemarketing, depending, and email. And the average gift is typically much smaller that way. But if you are a strong writer, that will be very, very beneficial. And strong writing doesn't mean 5-page letters. I mean, it means a good, in direct mail, there's all sorts of strategies and things. So for example, like you want your ask on the first page, generally towards the top, although I have been finding here in San Francisco, if my ask is on the bottom line of the first page, it's more successful. And then you flip it over and it has the rest of my signature. Live signature is better than not, meaning just an electronic signature. A live stamp, which looks, a stamp that you have to stick on an envelope, is more successful than what's called an indicia, which is a postage paid kind of no stamp. Invoice, like window envelopes for renewal, return better than closed front envelopes. The best stamp is still the American flag. That has the best response rate out of any stamp. I've always chosen to avoid any religious stamps. No religious stamps. Although Minneapolis is kind of Christmasville, right? So there you could get away with it more. But yeah, so there's all sorts of data and analysis, and that's part of the fun thing as well.
So Danielle, when you send a letter, although it's obviously typed and then you sign it, do you also always put a handwritten note alongside your signature?
I typically now, I have the letters printed, then I cross out the Dear Ms. Murray, cross it out, and I put Teresa. So I do it at the top. Because my writing is terrible. Like, I mean, it looks like a pet. I mean, it's really, 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 I should have been a doctor. It's really bad. So I, on occasion will, but just crossing the name, which basically says that the person who signed the letter actually read the letter and knows you. So you cross out the name. Although I had a staff member who I did that for a huge stack of letters, and she took them away. She was new. She took them away, came back with another stack. I'm like, what? She's like, oh, I saw that you crossed all the names out. I'm like, no. That's all by design. The etiquette says you can actually do that, by the way. Etiquette says that's okay. So there was a learning moment.
Now we have a question in the chat. How do you feel about cold calling? I recently had someone give me the direct contact of a director, but I feel awkward cold calling them and inviting them to a concert that I'm in. So I'm assuming from this question, it's a phone number. So as someone in a directorial position, how would you react, or what would you want from a phone call like that?
So half the time, if somebody had to call me, like half the time I would be wowed. I'd be like, oh my God, that person, that's cool. Because then the other half, unless it makes really good sense, I would be like, why would they waste their time calling me? So if it's like an invitation to something, I think it could be that you drop something in the mail, then you follow up with a phone call. Okay. And you can actually do a piece of mail that looks like it's going to 50 people, and you can mail it to one person. So for example, it could be like, dear friends, I'm sending this to 50 of my most, blah, blah. You can send it to one person. They don't need to know there's not 49 others. Right? So there are ways that you can.
Subterfuge. I like.
Yeah. So the phone is weird. There was a moment, probably about 5 years ago, you would never call a cell phone. You would never call a cell phone because it was like private or something. So now if you call the home phone, people don't have home phones. There was a moment that you would never like text people. And now our donors, we're using a new service called Hustle, where we're sending outbound text messages where people can reply and we can have conversations. Wildly successful. People are like, oh, thank you. Thank you, because now I don't have to dig through my emails. They love, we use this text service like the night their season renewal deadline was that night. So the next day we said, the renewal has passed. If you want to retain your seats for next season, respond to this text. And we sold, I think, $25,000 of tickets. But also in the world of the ballet, people for generations have had the same seats. And all they want to do is keep their seats or get them better and better and better. So a pretty warm audience. But yeah, like technology is really a friend when you try something that makes the patron's life easier. Yeah.
I'm going to pause for a couple more seconds for a question. And if there is not, then I will ask you my final one. So my question is about the ballet industry in the pandemic. So I started to follow it in the beginning because in my mind, opera and ballet are very similar. They have all of these ideas that, prevent a lay person from engaging with it for the first time. It's sort of seen as elitist. It has to happen with people in a theater. It doesn't really translate as well to video. So what have you seen recently in the ballet industry through this pandemic?
So we love the notion I think all of us in performing arts, of the communal gathering where we're all in the room. And in the world of theater, our pitch was always that the beauty is that what you see tonight will never, ever, ever, ever be seen again, just like it was. The people's attitudes are different. The traffic was different. The weather's different. The audience, like the vibe is different. So that's the beauty of live versus rewind, watch it on TV. So in ballet, they had been trained to come into the theater, sit and kind of, stare at a stage and watch the thing. So we quickly had to pivot. That's the word of the year, pivot. And we decided to do dance films. So we historically have always captured from the back of the opera house. So we capture the whole stage, and that way it was for archival, but we had lots and lots and lots. So back early in the pandemic, we were able to show those to our audiences while we figured out next steps. So we then chose to go with the service called Vimeo, which we were like, we're going to jump in. We're just going to start like filming some stuff. So we ended up doing 5 dance films. And the first big one that we did, there's a choreographer, and he's pretty famous. He's married to Natalie Portman. His name is Benjamin Millepied. So Benjamin agreed to direct a brief, I think it was 5 minutes, set to the music of, oh God. Oh, it won't. Oh, this is the old person's moment. The San Francisco, it will come to me. So the beautiful, 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 beautiful music. So there were 3 choreographers, all kind of coming in by Zoom, and there were little vignettes. So one kind of in the Palace of the Fine Arts, one just below the Golden Gate, one overlooking Coit Tower. What was the name of that? It'll come. God. Old age. So that was magnificent. So people saw it. We had like hundreds of thousands of views. We did this great big critical relief fund. We raised $5 million. Like everything was rolling. It was great. So we then sold our digital subscription where people could log in, pay money, and watch our films. So the problem is that was unanticipated was that we fed them these beautiful new dance films, and they were filmed with people like walking around the dancers with cameras. So they were very engaging, very different. It was not as static from the back of the opera house. So fast forward, we go through the season, everything's great. Like everyone's happy. We raised a lot of money. We had thousands and thousands. 4% of our viewers were from outside the US, which has never happened. Like everything is good. So it's time to rethink about the season that we're heading into. And a lot of audiences are like, yeah, we want to see some more dance films. So staff is like, great, we're going to film from the back of the opera house. And I'm like, I think we're facing a problem. you're all assuming that a dance film is just dance on film. All those people are assuming there's somebody under the Golden Gate filming these dancers. And so we had that moment where it was pretty horrifying, actually, because that's all they want. They want directed, beautiful, bite-sized pieces, and their attention span is about a 20th of what it is live in the opera house. So finding a way to serve up what people want without kind of downgrading the art. If I could do it all over again, a typical ballet evening is 3 pieces, like a mixed bill. Each is about, call it 30 minutes each. We were selling one kind of night at the ballet for $29. I think I would sell each third for like $9. I think I would sell them more bite-sized, because we found that people left, they logged out about 32 minutes in, pretty much no matter the ballet. So that's the attention span. And the artistic folks, like people like, I will make it and they will watch it. We're not, they actually won't. So I think we need to meet people in the middle where they are and compromise.
I love that. Serve what people want without downgrading the art. I think opera definitely needs to hear that as well. And so we do have one final question in the chat. You are obviously very outgoing. What is your advice to those of us who are more introverted? Or maybe what has your advice been to more introverted staff? Any quick tips to turn it on for a social networking situation?
So here's the good news. There are donors who I just frighten. There are some people, so when you build a team, it's kind of like a basketball team. You don't want a room full of like me's running around, because I'm kind of a slower runner. You want some shorter, fast people. You want some people who dribble better. So I have a team that's not all me. That would not be fun. So you deploy the right person to the right person. So I have always a more kind of quiet, less scary person on my team, who's generally a bit more understated, muted colors, longer skirts, lower heels. And that works well. So we determine exactly like, here's your table. And they enjoy that. Because there are some people I walk and they just kind of like look, and I then quickly evaporate and then put somebody else in. So having people who are quieter, it's very, very, very beneficial. So I would not want anyone to think you must be this crazy extrovert to be successful, because it's not true. And oftentimes a more introverted person can be really, really successful with grant writing, with institutional relations, sometimes with lobbying, so government relations. There's a way that you play to your strengths, and it's less, or even corporate fundraising. Although corporate fundraising, I actually think if you address it more like they are individuals, you will be much more successful. That's always been my jam. But I would want people to know that if they're not comfortable speaking and being in the front of the room, they can be wildly effective with writing, with emails, with one-on-one communications.
I'm just going to pause here for a couple seconds to see if there are any final questions. It looks like Tina O'Malley is about to furiously type. Oh.
Go, Tina, go.
No typos, just kidding. I do want to say, while she is typing, no offense to the other sessions we've done so far, but this is the first one where I've gone on a second page and filled my notes.
You must have written larger letters.
No. You were just dropping all these gems, like, say what you want, don't take it personal, it's not me, it's the project, make yourself essential and volunteer. The verifiable campaign, that was like, oh, okay, that's how fundraisers become like established.
Has to be verifiable, because you will find people in the development world where they get a job and like 18 months in, they don't have a job anymore. Okay. It's oftentimes because it takes like a year. If you get into a job and you have a budget and you miss a budget, you go, God, it wasn't my budget. So oftentimes, 18 months is when you start seeing if it's a fit or not for some.
We had our first Oops fundraiser recently, and we managed to make money off of it, so we are pretty proud. Okay,
fabulous.
So from Tina O'Malley, we have, do you think it's beneficial / effective for artists to privately fundraise outside of a company or organization they work with?
So for a separate project sort of
Yeah.
thing? Yeah, so yes. And I think you just have to be super, super clear. So I know at the ballet now, I have a brand new board member who's kind of become my bestie because that's how I roll, and I love her. And separately, we have 12 of our dancers going to Copenhagen to do their own festival. And I, before becoming executive director, am still flying to Copenhagen to go to the festival. So in meeting her, it just became apparent that she and her new husband, they only fly private. And I was like, oh, if you have any extra air miles, it wouldn't be for the ballet, but it's for the dancers. It's for the kids. They're doing this festival. So sure enough, she's like, oh my God, we have so many air miles. So I basically said, just to be clear, it's like not a San Francisco Ballet thing, but I connected her with him, Miles. He's happy, she's happy, I'm happy. And I was very clear because if they have to know in the world of San Francisco Ballet, because benefits matter, like you give money, you get certain things, that if it's not going to affect that for them, I just need to be very, very, very clear. But in this case, she was like, I have miles. I don't fly commercial anymore. And I was like, I have a user for them. So it was magic. And you can be very creative getting stuff. And I think when you have a pet project or passion and people see that, they will probably want to be supportive.
Yeah. And so your advice is just to ask.
Yeah, and just be really clear. Be like, I'm asking because it's also in development. I feel good when I bring an opportunity to a donor. Like, this is how you determine if you should work in development. If you believe that asking somebody for money is like a bad thing and you're taking, you should not work in development. If you believe like presenting an opportunity, getting money, and you're giving to somebody, you should work in development. That's the line of demarcation.
I think that's a really great answer to this question too. If you fully believe in the project that you're fundraising for and what you are building, then yes, ask someone for that money. But if you are doubting its value and your ability to complete the project, maybe don't.
Correct.
Love that. Well, if there are no further questions, Danielle, I want to thank you so much for this session. I think people got a lot out of it. Michaelia even put right at the beginning, crying face, crying face, crying face.
Love
I
it.
think we all kind of feel like we just want to hang out with you. And thank you so much for being open with all of your strategies and experience. And yeah, I just hope I get invited to a fundraiser or a cocktail party so that I can practice some of these skills.
Oh, absolutely. Come to San Francisco. Come to San Francisco.
I will just show up. Sorry in advance.
Just do a figure eight. You'll find me. We'll bump into each other.
I love that. Oh, we got one new message. Thank you from Tina O'Malley said that. So,
thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Just one thing to close out. This is a series we're doing. If you attend 3 of them and fill out this super quick survey afterwards, you'll be entered into a drawing to receive a free recording session with Carson Rose Schneider. 90 minutes you'll get, and Oops will be paying for it. We'll be picking 2 people. We're just trying to release some of that financial burden on being a singer in this industry. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Danielle.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. You're wonderful.
So welcome. I loved it.
Thank you